He came home from war with a chest full of medals and a mind full of fire. The United States Army trained him to survive, to endure, to kill when ordered, and to feel nothing afterward. The problem was, he couldn't stop feeling everything. Timothy McVeigh served in the Gulf War. He watched men die in the desert sand. He returned home decorated, a Bronze Star, a Combat Infantryman badge. By all external measures, a success. 4 years later, 168 people were dead in Oklahoma City. 19 of them were children. McVeigh isn't the only one. He is the most infamous. But the intersection of military service and capital murder is a thread that runs darker and deeper through American history than most people are willing to confront. These are not monsters who emerged from nothing. They were made, in part, by the same nation that later strapped them to a gurney. April 19th, 1995, 9:02 in the morning. Oklahoma City is waking up. Parents are dropping children off at the daycare on the second floor of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Federal workers are pouring their first cups of coffee. The sidewalk outside hums with ordinary life. Then the air itself tears open. A truck bomb, 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate, detonates with a force that shatters windows a mile away. The entire north face of the building collapses inward. Glass, concrete, steel, children's shoes. 168 people die. Over 680 are injured. Rescue workers will spend weeks pulling bodies from the rubble, some of them impossibly small. Timothy McVeigh is 90 miles away, driving a getaway car with no license plate. Within 90 minutes, a state trooper pulls him over for that plate, finds a concealed Glock on his person, arrests him for the gun. He has no idea he's just caught the deadliest domestic terrorist in American history. McVeigh's arrest photograph shows a man staring directly into the camera. Calm, unsettlingly calm. Within 72 hours, federal investigators pieced together the trail. Axle fragments from the truck, a vehicle identification number, rental records leading to a Kansas body shop, and then a sketch. 2 men, one of them matching a decorated Gulf War veteran named Timothy James McVeigh. His military background cut both ways in the investigation. On one hand, McVeigh was trained to leave no trace. He understood operational security, surveillance detection, explosive ordnance. The bomb itself, crude by military standards, was executed with a veteran's patience and discipline. On the other hand, that same military precision identified him. His meticulous planning left a paper trail a mile wide. Motel receipts, phone cards, storage units. The FBI described it later as the most intensive investigation in American history. McVeigh is transferred from county jail to federal custody. He shows no remorse. He calls the children killed in the daycare collateral damage. 2 words that only a soldier, or someone who wished he still was one, could use about a dead 5-year-old. Here is where this story gets complicated. Not sympathetic, complicated. Timothy McVeigh returned from the Gulf War in 1991, a changed man. Witnesses who knew him before and after described 2 different people. The army he loved had downsized after the war, and he was rejected from Special Forces training, a rejection he apparently never recovered from psychologically. He began consuming militia literature, anti-government manifestos. He became convinced that the federal government, the same one that had sent him to war, was now the enemy of the American people. Was this PTSD? Radicalization? Pre-existing fracture lines widened by combat? Probably all three, braided together in a way that no one adequately addressed, because no one was looking. McVeigh is an extreme case, but he is not an isolated one. Ronald Gray, U.S. Army private, stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Between 1986 and 1987, while still in uniform, he raped and murdered at least 4 women. Investigators believe the toll may be higher. Gray had no documented combat trauma. His violence preceded war. The military gave him access, mobility, and weapons, and failed to identify a predator already in its ranks. Then there is John Allen Muhammad, the DC sniper, a Gulf War veteran, a man who trained in demolition, survived combat, and returned to a civilian world where he felt invisible. His 3-week shooting spree in 2002, conducted with the tactical precision of a military operation, using his teenage accomplice Lee Boyd Malvo as a secondary shooter, paralyzed the entire Washington, D.C. region. Muhammad understood fields of fire. He understood concealment. He had been taught by the United States military how to kill cleanly and from distance. These men did not snap. They evolved into something the people who loved them no longer recognized. The question that haunts criminologists, military psychologists, and surviving family members alike is not just why they killed. It's why, in a system built around these men, nobody stopped them first. The transition from soldier to death row inmate is, by any psychological measure, a kind of second combat. A man trained for movement, for mission, for terrain, for the kinetic energy of survival, is placed in a cell 6 feet wide and 9 feet long. He wakes at the same time every day, eats the same food, walks the same 20 steps to the same wall and back. For Timothy McVeigh, the wait was relatively short by death row standards, 6 years. He waived his remaining appeals. He told his attorneys he had no interest in prolonging the inevitable. Whether that was genuine acceptance or one final act of control in a life where control had become everything, only McVeigh knew. John Allen Muhammad spent 7 years on Virginia's death row. Those who interacted with him there described a man who alternated between grandiosity and grief. He maintained his innocence until nearly the end. He wrote letters. He filed appeals. He watched Malvo, his teenage accomplice, receive life instead of death. Ronald Gray remains on federal death row to this day, one of only a handful of federal inmates under military death sentence. Each of these men, regardless of what they did, experienced the particular horror of waiting for a date to be assigned to the end of their life. That is not a mercy, but neither is it meant to be. June 10, 2001, Terre Haute, Indiana. Timothy McVeigh's final morning begins before dawn. His last meal request is modest: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. There is something almost unbearably human about that detail. The most destructive domestic terrorist in American history, choosing the same dessert a child might order at a summer fair. He spends the morning meeting with his attorneys and 2 spiritual advisors, though McVeigh himself described his religious beliefs as agnostic. He signs legal documents. He is quiet, methodical. Even now, he maintains control of the room. Outside the prison, the families of his 168 victims watch by closed-circuit television feed, the first time in American history that an execution has been broadcast to witnesses remotely. Over 200 of them have gathered. Some weep. Some sit in total stillness. Some have been waiting 6 years for this moment and feel nothing at all, which, grief counselors will later note, is completely normal. At 7 a.m., McVeigh is moved to the execution chamber. He refuses a final statement. Instead, he hands the warden a handwritten copy of William Ernest Henley's poem, Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. At 7:14 a.m. on June 11, 2001, Timothy James McVeigh is pronounced dead by lethal injection. He is the first federal prisoner executed in the United States in 38 years. He does not flinch. He does not speak. He surveys the witness gallery with open eyes until those eyes go still. The families watching by closed-circuit television react in silence, or in tears, or in quiet exhalations of breath held for years. Bud Welch, whose daughter Julie died in the Murrah building, had publicly opposed the execution. He believed it would give him nothing. He was right. He said afterward, "There was no sense of relief, no closure, just quiet." November 19, 2009, Jarrett, Virginia. John Allen Muhammad is executed by lethal injection at 9:11 p.m. His final words are, I did not. He stops. The sentence never finishes. Neither, perhaps, did he understand what he had become. War does not end when the guns go quiet. For some men, it follows them home, in nightmares, in paranoia, in a rage they can't locate the source of. Most veterans live with those wounds in silence, without ever harming anyone. They carry the weight, they endure it. But a small, tragic number, undone by trauma, by ideology, by whatever fracture existed in them before the uniform went on, become the thing they were trained to destroy. What do we owe them? What do we owe their victims? Those are not easy questions, and they are not ones this channel will pretend to fully answer. But they are questions worth sitting with, because justice, real justice, demands that we understand, even when understanding is deeply uncomfortable. If you believe these examinations matter, if you think the psychology behind the verdict is as important as the verdict itself, the execution verdict is where those questions live. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us next time as we go deeper into the cases that define the outer edge of human nature and the law that answers it.